and thus then had to be repatriated via Mali, because they were evacuated to Mali, and then when they got there, they realized, of course, they're Nigerian. There's also examples of Liberians and Burkinabe in Côte d'Ivoire that were also victims of reprisals, violent reprisals. Now to move to institutional responses. These are three quotes looking at three different issues on how civil society and other institutions are responding to returnees. I wanted to just point out a few of the main findings related to stakeholders. The first thing is that moving migrants out of harm's way is the top priority. Across the board, this comes out not just in our research, but also in the guidelines everywhere. This is the top priority, and it's also primarily conducted or facilitated by states. So states are the ones providing laissez-passer. They're the ones that can organize cross-border cooperation. For example, opening of borders in Egypt and Tunisia during the Libya crisis, or Syria opening its borders during the 2006 Lebanon war. This is an important way that they're involved, of course. Secondly, IOM and UNHCR are very strong partners throughout the process, both in managing refugee and migrant arrivals, organizing evacuations, and service provision and reintegration projects in the longer term. Then also CSOs are really important partners, and because also they're often the most trusted by migrants. However, in some cases, CSOs, particularly those responding to migration issues, were not common in the country, in the home country, or the country that was experiencing crisis at that time. And in some cases, this led to galvanizing basically the community in order to form NGOs or form units within NGOs to respond to this community. We saw this in Lebanon, in Niger, and Liberia. Lastly, private actors are involved, but it's more in an ad hoc manner, and it's based on personal relationships between the migrant and the private, usually landlord or employer. And some of the basic policy learning is that institutional learning is very weak. What progress we can see is that the main policy response has been establishing contingency plans. However, even when contingency plans are developed, they often don't include migrants. Second is a lack of accurate data. This is on both migrants, where they are, who they are, how many, not who they are in terms of names, but backgrounds basically, and also how the crisis develops. This is data that's missing, and it hinders the responses any responses of any actual civil society or states. However, at the same time, this is on the next slide. Third is funding constraints are limiting to the impact of responses. This means projectized funding. This means shifting priorities. This can impact how or whether organizations can respond. Another one related to CSOs is the establishment of migrant-focused NGOs has been an important byproduct of some crises, as we saw in, for example, Lebanon. And that's one example of private actors responding to or learning from the crisis, basically. In Thailand, they've now prepared contingency planning in large-scale businesses. Conclusions thus far. Because as I mentioned before, this is ongoing research, and so these are what we've found so far. Irregularity is a multiplying factor. And before I say this, I also want to mention that all of these conclusions and many of these findings are also reflected in the guidelines. So these are some of the same topics that are coming out over and over again, but we're trying to also look at them in the longer term. Irregularity is a multiplying factor, and this exacerbates vulnerabilities during a crisis. This is particularly related to data collection, where lack of data is an important obstacle across the board. However, interesting is that despite this, across the board, everyone basically agrees that they need more data, but there are very few tangible responses to date that have been implemented to gain better data. Second is that cooperation and coordination, of course, needs to be improved. But first, this starts with establishing relationships and trust between stakeholders and migrants, among stakeholders themselves, and so on. Longer-term reintegration support is generally missing or ad hoc in nature. And migrant responses to difficult situations that we've seen across the research have been dynamic, resilient, flexible, and creative. This can be, for example, in establishing associations to advocate for their own rights, using circular or nonlinear patterns of mobility. This is also in terms of looking at how migrants' networks and social capital, or lack thereof, have been instrumental in their immediate responses to crises, and also in reestablishing themselves in the mid to long term. Lastly, is that something we found is that subsequent crises divert donor and service provider focus. For example, Syrian refugee arrivals in Lebanon have diverted funding. Of course, there's important funding needed for that group. However, several stakeholders mentioned, well, okay, but now donors don't want to hear about domestic workers, for example. Refugees and climate change issues around Lake Chad have been issues for Cameroon and Chad. The Ebola epidemic, for example, was a subsequent crisis for Liberia. That's basically it. These are the recent and forthcoming publications. If you didn't get a copy of the Emerging Findings Report, it's available at that link, as well as 2 research briefs that we've recently published on long-term implications, which is based on desk research. Both of those are based on desk research, and the second is on actors and stakeholder involvement in crisis mitigation. The 6 case studies are in progress. Final comparative report is foreseen in 2017, as well as a European responses summary paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Megan. So the second part of the presentation will be my colleague Mohammed and I will be presenting the main findings of research conducted on the Libya case study. This is conducted with Egyptian detainees and attempt to understand the impact of such crisis on the socioeconomic conditions of Egyptian detainees. Just a brief background to the aims and objectives of the study. The main aim was analyzing the push factors in Egypt and mapping the pull factors in Libya, understanding the socio-economic applications of the Libyan crisis, socio-economic and other violence, mapping out services and service providers in an effort to identify unmet needs and gaps in such needs, and also providing consultations to relevant stakeholders and to the bigger frame of the other case studies as conducted by our safety partners. Our field work was conducted between March and July 2016, and like I said, it mainly targeted returnees from Libya, but equally other stakeholders whom we identified as key informants in a way to try to gather as much information as possible. We chose 3 main governorates, Minya, Suheg, and Fayoum, and I will get in a second as to why these 3 sites of governorates were chosen. We adopted 2 main qualitative research methods, focus group discussions and in-depth interviews with migrants, as well as semi-structured interviews with NGOs, 2 of them referred to be anonymous, UN intergovernmental organizations, governmental, and 1 expert. Out of the focus group discussions, we identified some of the key informants, also non-migrants, whom we thought either they were extremely vulnerable or had more to share or had more information about the situation. So that was quite an in-depth interview. The choices of governorates was based on our initial interviews with stakeholders and other desk review, identifying Sohag, Asyut, Minya, Sharqiya, Rufaya, Fayoum, and to a lesser extent Alexandria, Bahira, and Kafr Sheikh as the main sending governorates of Egyptians towards Libya. However, due to limitations in access and our having contacts in these three governorates, two of them were the main sending governorate, in Fayoum to a lesser extent, which was Sohag, Minya, and Fayoum. Our gatekeepers constituted some NGOs as well as some key figures in the community, Better Life Foundation in Minya, as well as other community leaders in Sohag and Fayoum. The sampling techniques was more snowballing purposive and to some extent convenience sampling techniques. We targeted those who have witnessed the 2011 crisis. 90% of our sample respondents have witnessed the 2011 crisis, with a minority in Fayoum who only witnessed the 2014 and 15 violence in Libya. For all of these reasons, of course, we have challenges and limitations. I mean, the main one is not only the choice of governorates, but also having access to information. In many cases, even NGOs who minimally worked with Libyans did find were not able to provide full information or accurate information due to lack of exposure or lack of involvement. We have been facing some challenges in approaching ministerial respondents. So far we've only interviewed one ministry, hoping to interview the second even as we wrap up the project. The profile of migrants, they were exclusively males. And like I said, they were also exclusively rural. We targeted, we had three villages from Minya, Bahnasha, Demshir, and Hassan Leshi. Three of them are main sending villages of Egyptians towards Libya. We had Tunis village in Sohag and Tatoun in Fayoum. Tatoun is very famous of irregular migration towards Italy, but it also has community of. It also has. There are also a large number of migrants towards Libya, not necessarily Italy. It was a primarily young sample, and also the sample represented a larger population, the majority under 35 years old, with very few informants between 40 and 50 years. They had either basic education, primary education, or no education at all, with very few of them who were university graduates. Before migration to Libya, after returning from Libya, they worked as seasonal workers in agriculture, traders, and daily laborers in Egypt. Like I said, 90% witnessed the 2011 Libyan crisis. One of the key interesting findings is that it was when we started the field work, when we asked gatekeepers to identify those who had witnessed 2011, we were under the impression that those who went in 2000, who witnessed 2011 just returned and that's it. But apparently it has been a form of a circular pattern where migrants migrated even before 2011 and kept on trying either to access or successfully accessing Libya, in many cases every single year. So it's a pattern that has been going on until 2015. Of course, the push factors are quite clear. It's a shortage of work opportunities in the village, mainly since we're talking about a rural community, the employment that is very seasonal, depending on the harvesting season. Often the idea of unable to build ourselves was quite expressed in a way, unable to get married or having the duty of marrying off a sibling, mainly a sister, or building houses, buying karats, quarter or half karats, refurbishing some houses. As one of 32-year-old respondent from Tunis village from Sohag said, in Libya we have to find extra work. You could have two different jobs. We all had lots of financial commitments in Egypt, so we had to send money back. You could keep around 100 dinars with you there, and the rest could be sent back. Money sent would be used for the marriages of one or more siblings, Also, some houses were built with the money sent back. There's a difference between those who went because they needed to travel and those who were looking for an extra income. I think he was trying to make the distinction between the majority who had to go there and who have very urgent financial commitments, and others who might have gone there just to promote their income. Choosing Libya as a destination also depended on comparing it to other options in the Gulf. So it was often pointed out that unlike Saudi Arabia, which has the kafala system, Libya doesn't. It's cheaper than Qatar. Qatar, we were talking about before 2011. It costed them up to £5,000 to travel regularly to Libya, getting a tourist visa for 2 months that they often overstayed. In comparison to, for example, 40,000 Egyptian pounds to go to Qatar. However, they said that now Libya can go up to 13,000 since the borders are closed, so it's through the irregular channel. It was very cheap to go there. Also, the high currency rate in comparison to the Egyptian was often rated as one of the reasons. The easy access to find work in agriculture and other daily rate of construction, particularly, was one of the main reasons why Egyptians decided to go to Libya. Through also the fact that there is a large Egyptian community who helped each other to find work and share housing, etc. The fact that it was very close to Egypt geographically made it also very attractive, promoting, as I said, circular migration patterns and sending remittances and promoting regular visits to family. Before 2011, the socioeconomic conditions in Libya was that when we often asked what other nationalities were there, how big were Egyptians in comparison to others, there were always this rough estimate of 5 to 6 million Egyptians. This is not, of course, accurate. However, they said that they were the largest group in comparison to Sudanese, Moroccan, Tunisians, and other migrants. Egyptians were concentrated in Misrata, Sirte, Derna, Benghazi, and Tripoli. Before 2011, the majority worked as daily laborers in poultry farms, and as well as all these daily professions such as plumbers, carpenters, street vendors, and the rate was around 30 to 40 dinars. In 2011, the rate accelerated to 70 to 80, sometimes 120 per day for work of construction, and the businesses started changing to more towards marble and ceramic business, more towards the construction sectors, wall painters, etc. Some of the minority of our respondents owned small businesses of clothes, or mainly they were businesses of clothes. After 2011, the rate decreased a little bit, 50 to 60 dinars, because there was a large supply of Egyptian migrants. 90% of remittances were sent back home. There was always when we were asked if you're getting 600, how much you keep, how much you send to family, say we keep like 50 or 70 dinars, and the rest is sent to family, either through the regular visitors, other Egyptian visitors, or through Libyans. There were these informal channels where you give to a Libyan wire to another Libyan in Egypt, taking from 5 to 15% of the total amount and handing the amount to the migrant's family. As I earlier explained, the cheap housing was one of the main reasons socioeconomic conditions were good in Libya. People were mainly clustered, residences with 10 to 20 people in one household. The relations with the Egyptian consulate, and my colleague will delve more into this, but even before 2011 was almost not there. Migrants only resorted to the Egyptian consulate when they lost their passports, they were in need of a legal document, they need to transfer the deceased person, etc. But they often refer to the relations more of a procedural relation. Remittances were mainly used for different layers of expenses. I mean, the first one was consumption and medical services, marriages, as I said, of siblings and sometimes of the migrants themselves, and house refurbishments. A minority of our respondents identified using remittances to buying quarter or half carrots, and also towards saving. There were also a variety of goods transferred, all before 2011. Because as my colleague will explain, it was confiscated after 2011 to transfer anything.
and they were mainly gifts, clothes, and electrical appliances. As a 32-year-old respondent from Sohag says, life is cheap to go, Libya is cheap to go to, but money is the most important thing there. We all worked in construction, including ceramic business. Even when you stay at home a few days in Libya, it was still affordable because you can work to shifts on a working day. And if you stay at home, you save money for food. We also had to find extra work. You could have two different jobs. We all had lots of financial commitments in Egypt, so you had to send money back. You would keep around 100 dinars with you, and the rest would be sent back to the family. But of course, often when we ask how good life was in Libya, the first thing they all talk about the good conditions, and then suddenly, as if they all start to remember all the grievances. And they tell us that it was not easy to live in Libya. And as two quotes I have here say that confiscation of salaries was often a very, very common trend, even before 2011, and more so after 2011 crisis. There was always the perception among Libyans, as per Egyptians, that Egyptians are there to eat food, reap Libya's goods, all kind of phrases in relation to competition for jobs. Egyptians always talked about the fact that they were the most active among